in my slot today, I just want to talk a little bit about the Climate Change Act itself, the progress that we've sort of made, 13 years on from its introduction, talk about some of the challenges that lie ahead, and conclude with some kind of reflections, which I hope will kind of be useful for other countries, including Latvia, in terms of kind of more generalisable things about what's worked and perhaps where the challenges are. So the first thing is the UK's Climate Change Act. This is really just to describe the core elements of it. Essentially, it's kind of quite simple in the sense that the UK's kind of Climate Act, introduced in 2008, the key core component of it at the time, it set an 80% reduction by 2050. So it set a very clear long-term goal for emission reduction. And kind of within that, it set a clear pathway by setting budgets that progressively got tighter up to that sort of 2050 kind of goal. So these sort of 5-year periods called carbon budgets. And as you can see in the bottom left, those bars get lower and lower. So essentially it sets the long-term target, but also sets a pathway, which essentially is a glide path down to that long-term target. So it sets really good both clarity on the long-term objective, but also near-term kind of reductions that are needed to get there. There's also a toolkit and a monitoring framework. So alongside setting up these emissions reduction targets, the Act created the Climate Change Committee, which is an independent body from the UK government, which advises the UK government on both how to hit the targets, but also every year produces a progress report to assess how well the UK is or isn't doing in terms of meeting the targets. Those 5-year carbon budgets, as I've mentioned, are set at least 12 years in advance to give kind of clarity on kind of what the emission reduction targets will be. We're just currently in the process of setting the 6th carbon budget here in the UK. The quick thing I'll mention is in terms of the critical sort of background to the Climate Change Act was really the Stern report in 2006, which really reframed climate not just as essentially as an economic and not just really a moral issue. And the real, I think, advantage of the Climate Change Act in the UK is it kind of, to some extent, helped depoliticise climate. So essentially, it was less of a question of just not whether to act, but more exactly how you act. So it sort of moved the debate on the UK. In terms of kind of progress, so 13 years on from the introduction of the Act, in the UK, we've had a kind of really positive sort of story to tell in terms of decoupling growth in emissions. So as it says, and you can see in the chart on the left-hand side, between that 1990 period, which is the baseline for the UK, and 2019, emissions reduced by 44%, whilst the UK economy grew by 78%. So that's a really positive and kind of strong achievement and story. Looking on the right-hand side, you can see that actually a lot, and in fact the majority of this progress was came from emissions in the power sector, so reductions in the power sector. And there was a very rapid transition in the UK away particularly from coal power and a shift towards actually gas power. So today it's only 1.6% of actually the UK's electricity mix. And just 5 years ago it was 25%. So it's a very, very rapid shift away from coal in the UK. That can be credited really to, in the context of the UK, having a very kind of stable carbon price. So the UK introduced a carbon price floor alongside being a participant in the EU ETS. So that provided, if you like, a clear price on carbon, which facilitated the shift from essentially put a more price on dirty forms of pollution such as coal and sort of hastened that shift to gas. And alongside that, the UK has been one of the sort of pioneers and sort of pushing forward the development of offshore wind. So we introduced a sort of framework to if you like, commission offshore renewable energy, and that framework has driven down costs extremely quickly. So we started out at about £140 per megawatt hour, and we're now down to about £40 per megawatt hour. And so that, if you like, system of auctions has been really successful in making wind power much cheaper in the UK. So that's facilitated the decarbonisation of the UK power system. So the big picture for the UK is very positive so far, but as this quote from the Chris Stark, who's the Chief Executive of the UK Climate Change Committee, sort of points out, it's served us very well so far, but particularly as we go forward and when we think about net zero emissions, it's going to be tested in a way that hasn't really been tested so far. And I just mentioned, I'm not going to go through any of these in detail, but just as an example, in the UK, we have currently gas boilers in most homes and buildings. And to decarbonise heating, for example, in buildings, we've currently got about 4.5% of low carbon, 4.5% proportion of sort of homes heated by low carbon options. And we need to boost that to about 80 to 90%, depending on which scenario you go with for net zero. So there are huge challenges across different sectors of the economy in the UK to hit that net zero target. So I mentioned net zero. So in June 2019, the UK was the first major economy to set a net zero target in law. So the original Climate Change Act was amended to make the target more stringent to net zero emissions. And more recently, the UK came forward with a more ambitious 2030 climate target, which is an at least 68% reduction on 1990 levels by 2030. So that's a very ambitious ratcheting up of kind of near-term ambition as well. The government also outlined a 10-point plan to help kind of hit that target, which included 12 billion of government investment. And there is in the UK a slew of strategies coming forward on different sectors to decarbonise different sectors of the economy. And we do have, by the end of the year, our Treasury departments producing a sort of review on how to hit net zero emissions, looking at the costs and how to do it. So there's a lot going on domestically. So I just want to really conclude by some final kind of reflections on kind of the UK's experience with the Climate Change Act. So I think in the UK, political support has really been fundamental to the foundation of the UK's kind of framework, and the clear goal and accountability and short-term targets has been really core components, and they've worked well so far. The key issue is we now need to broaden the progress we've made to other sectors outside the power sector, and really for each country, the challenges and opportunities for the different sectors will kind of course vary. I think the take-home message, I think, on the Climate Change Act is really it's a very important and necessary part of the UK's decarbonisation sort of efforts, but definitely not sufficient in and of itself. So really you need a clear, comprehensive policy framework needed to drive decarbonisation. So those kind of strategies I mentioned forthcoming in the UK, looking at how you decarbonise particular areas, are really critical. In the UK, I think, and increasingly elsewhere, as you talk about net zero emissions and the changes that need to happen, you need really high political level support to make that happen. So in the UK, we now have a climate change committee, which meets at cabinet level to sort of discuss and drive forward climate action. And I think the key point as well is that you cannot really just have climate action driven by the Environment Ministry. So in the UK, I mentioned the HMT, our Treasury net zero cost review, but I think increasingly it's got to be a whole of government effort with finance ministries sort of front and centre of the effort. In the UK, kind of continued public pressure has been really important. And I think the CTC itself has been very effective and carries a lot of weight because it has a lot of expertise. So I think really adequately resourcing that independent body has been crucial. The final thing I'll mention is, so I think hopefully those reflections are useful. There are some other tools out there that sort of UK gets involved in to help others develop their own sorts of long-term strategies, including the 2050 calculator, and there's a 2050 pathways platform. But I think I will stop there to leave time for other colleagues to come in.